And as usual, before we commence the agenda, I'll just read out some protocol housekeeping issues. So can I remind everyone present that the hybrid meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other people are speaking? And if a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand if you're joining me in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function. If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak, please can you turn your camera on to indicate that, or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by myself as chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this isn't possible for any reason, please bring this to my attention or to the attention of one of the Democratic Services officers. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used, as I've already explained, to highlight any technical issues. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, then please let myself or Democratic officers know. So please can I welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers, Vale residents, and also to anyone else who's watching the live meeting broadcast. And we move straight on to the agenda, beginning with apologies for absence. Are there any apologies, please?
I've not had any directly through, Chair, but I'm sure the committee will let us know if there are any apologies to be given.
Thank you. I see no hands, so I assume that all committee members are in attendance. So now we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting from the 22nd of October 2024. Are members happy with those minutes? And can I have a proposer? Councillor Hooper, thank you very much. Can I have a seconder for those minutes, please? Councillor Iannucci-Williams, are you happy to second?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, I see no hands. So we move on to agenda item 4. This is a cabinet reference concerning the revised highway maintenance 3-year resurfacing plan, 2024 to 2027. It sets out changes to the prioritisation process and is before us tonight for our consideration. And just to advise committee members that the proposed changes will be taken as agreed unless committee recommends any changes that would affect the plan that is currently before us in draft form. So to take us through this, we're joined by Colin Smith and Nathan Thomas from Neighbourhood Services. Welcome both to Scrutiny this evening, and over to you. I think, is it Nathan who's making a short presentation? Thank you very much, Nathan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can we open up the presentation, please? Thank you very much. I've prepared a short presentation and I've tried to capture the details of the report. But before I go into it, I would like to point out I've spotted a very small error on item 2.9 of the Cabinet report, and it references that the revenue budget is 200,000. That's actually incorrect, and it's 850,000. If we could minute that, please. Is that okay? Thank you very much. Okay, let's make a start. So the Cabinet report captures the 3 different types of highway preservation works that we undertake, whether that be traditional road resurfacing, surface dressing, or micro asphalt. And as we lead into the presentation I've prepared, I can go through the various types, as well as talking about the changes to the scoring matrix. So if we go to okie dokie. Right, introduction. The Council has a statutory duty to maintain the highway at public expense under Section 41 of the Highways Act 1980. The report seeks approval to make the amendments to the council's scoring matrix for resurfacing, following on from a review. And the report proposes the scoring matrix, which is Appendix B, supersedes the current version. If we could go to the next slide, please. Fantastic, thank you. Why review and make amendments? I think it's important that the highway maintenance team stay current in best practices and not to rely on older, tried and tested methods, simply because we've always done it that way. Consideration should always be given that a process possibly fit for purpose 10 plus years ago may not be so reliable in today's modern world. Come closer to the mic. Is that any better? Better. Should I start again, or do you want me to pick up where I left off? Okay. And the report recommends that we update the existing scoring matrix, following on from previous feedback that active travel needs to be incorporated within, even more so given the increased popularity in recent years. And the report seeks approval to accept the 3-year plan and adopt the new scoring matrix. Next slide, please. So as part of the process and as part of the review process for the scoring matrix, I reached out to active travel officers within the Vale of Glamorgan Council. This is the Senior Sustainable Transport Officer, Lisa Elliott. So if I give you some statistics, in 2017, there were 73 active travel routes identified as future existing routes on the active travel map. The 2021 map has 254 routes that measure a total of 208 kilometres. And in December 2021, we had 83 kilometres of existing shared cycle routes and walking routes. And these are routes that meet the active travel guidance across the Vale. And as of October 2024, we now have 91 kilometres of existing shared cycleway, walking and cycle routes. Next slide, please. Also, as part of the review process, I reached out to our neighbours to see what they were doing to consider active travel within their scoring matrix. Cardiff Council, an ex-colleague of mine, Gareth Jones, he's a senior section leader in the assessments team. They note active travel as part of their scoring matrix, but it carries no scoring, so it's simply a yes or no answer. I also reached out to another ex-colleague of mine at Regeneration Council, Steve Sherwood. He's an experienced highway maintenance engineer, and they don't consider active travel within their scoring matrix for resurfacing sites. I did reach out to Rhondda Cynn and Taff, but unfortunately I didn't have a response. Next slide, please. So I've compared the two scoring matrices there, the one which we've previously used, and the Appendix B, which is the new modern version. And hopefully today, if we all get agreement, then we can put this to plan and start using this with immediate effect. So if I go on to the next slide, please. The types of carriageway maintenance works. Carriageway resurfacing removes the existing asphalt via cold milling process and completely replaces the material at various depths within the wearing and binder course layers. You'll see within the photograph there, that's Park Crescent in Barry, which I think, to be fair, the highway maintenance team worked immensely hard to undertake the work here. We obviously had to close the road as part of the process. And as you can see there, the sheer size of the plant that's required to undertake such an activity. The road horizons are responsibly disposed of and much recycled back into specialist mixed asphalts for reuse. This process is certainly disruptive and very often requires a full road closure. And this is simply to ensure that the workforce are safe, but also to reduce the amount of longitudinal joints, simply because these are future maintenance issues and they're very often the start of failure within the surface course material. The highway maintenance team always work hard to ensure the least amount of disruption to the network user as possible. And very often, lots of the network may be closed, and we do our best to communicate this via our comms or via letter drops or advance warning notices. And I think it's an important message that we get across, really, that lots of people think that we close the roads just for our convenience, and we certainly don't. We're mindful of the bus service providers, the visitors to the Vale, and it's immensely important that we We deliver the works with the least amount of disruption. If I go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. This photograph shows some surface dressing being undertaken. This is in Lampwick Major Road, I believe. Surface dressing is a sustainable and environmentally responsible maintenance solution. The Vale of Glamorgan Council use a cold applied ultra thin surfacing solution for our surface dressing, and this provides fantastic value for money to preserve and extend the life of the existing wearing course material. This product prevents water ingress, oxidization, and provides texture to the existing road surface. You can see in the lower section of the photograph there's some crazing, and as soon as that opens up even further and it deteriorates more, you allow water ingress, and then the colder times of the year that will then freeze, and then before we know it, a defect, which is commonly referred to as a pothole, can open up overnight. So the surface dressing material certainly does seal up the highway. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. Finally then, the third treatment is microasphalt, and this is another sustainable and environmentally responsible maintenance solution, however more commonly used where surface dressing is not suitable, for example in the more populated areas as photographed. This is another cold applied solution that uses a two-layer process, and we regulate the existing surface prior to application, and this is simply to take out any sort of deformations or rutting in the existing material. It is another fantastic value for money treatment. It's a lot cheaper in comparison to traditional carriageway resurfacing, and it just preserves the life of the existing material. This product also prevents water ingress, which is one of the biggest contributing factors to potholes. And then the final slide, please. That's the end of my presentation, and open it up to any questions.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for taking us through that report. Are there any questions, please? Councillor Prothero, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nathan. I would like to ask a question about a product that I've seen on our Vale of Glamorgan Council social media page today, which really interests me, and I'm quite excited to see that we're going to be doing a pilot with a new resurfacing material, which is not just sustainable, but also addresses our net carbon zero ambition, and is produced locally and is using recycling material. So I understand it's a pilot. So I'd just like to know a little bit more about the pilot, and just say well done, because it sounds a really, really interesting pilot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Nathan, are you able to respond to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Prothero. The trial, I think for us, it's our neighbouring authority at Cardiff Council. They have used this product. It's tried and tested. So I was really keen to sort of try a location in the Vale of Glamorgan, which we did at Scoma Road. It's a biochar extract. It's made from it's a chemical reaction. It's an extract of recycled steel. So the aggregate comes from steel asphalt, on Rover Way in Cardiff, and only a couple of weeks ago could have potentially been scrap vehicles, shopping trolleys, washing machines. So it's really interesting. Ironically, we've had lots of questions on it, specifically regarding the maintenance period, and we actually get a 5-year maintenance period out of the product. So I'm really interested to see how it holds up, and I'm really positive, and I think it's going to be a great success, and I'm looking forward to using it again.
Did you want to come back in on that, Councillor Prothero?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to ask Nathan, so if it is successful, are we hoping to use it, and maybe it might be the process of choice going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. Ironically, our current resurfacing contractor is they're built up of contractors on a South East Wales highway framework, and the material that we used on Scoma Road, they're the chosen contractor are not on the framework, so it's a specialist by its own nature. So it's certainly something that I'm more than happy, and I'm certainly keen on exploring further. The contractor are not interested in going on a framework because they want to have their own bespoke product. They don't want to populate the whole of the UK. They're quite content doing small localised areas. But obviously we've got exemption rules, procurement rules for specialist material, which is how we managed to deliver the work previously. And I'm certainly looking forward to sort of expanding on this one trial and maybe using it elsewhere.
Thank you, Nathan. Can I ask a follow-up question to that? So in terms of it being a trial, how long will the trial last? You talked about a 5-year maintenance programme. Will it be 5 years before we know whether or not this is a product that we might want to use in other areas of the Vale?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think it's something that we need to wait 5 years for. I think it's contributing, towards our net zero objectives. We're already getting a extended warranty period with the material, and we're not paying a premium for this material. It's comparative to what we're paying at the moment. So it's certainly something I think that we need to be looking maybe more towards in the future, maybe within the next year to 2 years.
We'll be interested to, I'm sure committee will be interested to hear the outcome of the trial when a report comes before us next time. Thank you, Nathan. Councillor Prothero, your hand is still up. Can I check if that's a legacy hand? Or did you want to come back in? No. Okay, thank you. Councillor Iannucci-Williams, please.
Thanks, Chair. I mainly had a question sort of about the process before the so the report mentions footway resurfacing. Just as a conveniently timed question, really. So in my street this week, some of the footpath has been resurfaced, but the people had to come back possibly once, possibly twice, because cars were parked in their way, and we did, like, either the people weren't in or we didn't know who owned them to move them. Is it something that we could look into about whether people are getting letters before their streets are resurfaced? I'm wondering whether or not it would have been cheaper to warn us in my street to move our cars so that the people didn't have to come back twice to resurface the bits they couldn't do at the same time. So just wondered if that's something that we could look into.
Thank you, Councillor. Nathan, is that a question for you to pick up? Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. The resurfacing contractor, surface dressing and micro-asphalt contractors are all meant to notify residents via letter drops, but picking up on the comments made about the footway resurfacing, that is our term maintenance contractor that's undertaking that works. They are also meant to letter drop, and the fact that they haven't is something that I can certainly raise with them. What I would say is we don't pay any additional costs. We pay a square metre rate. So if they have to attend once or 3 or 4 times, it's at no additional cost to the public purse.
Thank you, Nathan. It seems to me to be a very good reason why they would want to do letter drops, so that they're not in a position where they incur the cost of having to do 3 visits instead of 1. But it's good to have the reassurance that if they fail to do it and there are additional visits, that's not at cost consequence to the council. Thank you. Councillor Ernest, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Nathan. Can I just refer you to 2.3 in the report on page 5? And for those who are listening who haven't got the papers, over the past year, the matrix has been revised to incorporate recommendations to consider active travel and cycle routes in the evaluation process. Now, I understand that also includes bus routes, or is going to include bus routes. And I think that's a very important part of the process, because we've certainly a number of roads, particularly in my part of the world, where roads included on bus routes and buses passing every 10 minutes or so are passing over very badly maintained roads in terms of bumps and humps. I wonder whether you can just address that for me, Nathan. Thank you.
Nathan, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Ernest. You are correct, Councillor Ernest. The public transport is noted within the proposed scoring matrix, but it was also in the previous scoring matrix, and the weightings are exactly the same. The biggest contributing factor now is the active travel section on its own. I think, to be fair, whether it be a school transport or whether it be public transport, they are so important to the network user. So it's important that it's included within the matrix.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Nathan.
very much indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor William in the chamber, please.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to start by apologising for my lateness. Terrible traffic on the way back from Cardiff. This is really just a thank you to the work that's been done, especially Park Crescent, for example. After a lot of campaigning, I'm just very glad to see the response, and it's been fantastic work, and thank you for listening, and thank you for doing.
Thank you, Councillor. And Nathan, you quite rightly highlighted how hard the team work, and particularly in terms of minimising disruption. So please do pass on Councillor Williams' thanks, but also the thanks of the committee for the work that's being done. Thank you. Councillor Norman, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nathan, for the report. Just one question is saying about the walkways. What do you intend to do about the state of the paved areas? We have lots and lots of complaints around Adlet Major about pavements with the paving slabs are cracked or mislined and are trip hazards, and people are always, complaining about them. Will these come underneath this work schedule?
Thank you, Councillor. And if I can, Nathan, add a second part to that question. Where residents become aware or notice that there are potential trip hazards or damage, what's the easiest way of them alerting us to that? Because I know this committee's received a report previously about the regular inspections that are made, and those have actually increased. But obviously, we're not, officers aren't everywhere all the time. So if members of the public spot things, how do they pick them up? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Norman. If I address Councillor Norman's concern first, I think it's immensely important that I express that we have 4 highway inspectors that undertake these routine inspections. We've got 2,590 unique street references. So that's separate USRNs around the whole of the Vale of Glamorgan. We are set to intervals, as you've previously noted, Chair. We suggested the frequency of inspections in certain locations were increased, and I think there was only one or two that decreased. Specifically to Llantwit Major, we have got issues in Llantwit Major. The biggest issue is the footways are inspected by the highway inspector. We do raise works orders. They are logged and they are repaired by our term maintenance contractor. We have a big issue with inappropriate parking, and that's the biggest issue, not just in Llantwit. Penarth is exactly the same, and some areas of Barry as well. And as quick as we can fix the defects, the paving is displaced, and very often we're not advised. So I think it's equally important, and this leads into your question, Chair, is that should anybody see any defects that have, even if it's been recently repaired, please notify us. The Vale of Glamorgan residents can create their own customer portal, and they can log on themselves and take a photo and drop a pin on it, and it's really, really quick and effective, and it'll come to us and we can react to it as quick as we can. I think visually and aesthetically, paving slabs may potentially be cracked, but they can have a crack running through it. It doesn't necessarily pose a safety concern, because if it's not rocking or it's not chipped or missing, then it can still remain cracked because it's still complete. I think the easiest thing is if the residents see anything, by all means, please let us know. I'm all for Welsh Government granting powers to whether that be the police or the local authorities. We need to enforce inappropriate parking on our footways. It's the only way we're going to protect our assets.
Thank you very much, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Nathan. Councillor Hooper, please.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks for the report. And I'm going to say thank you as well. When this report last went to the committee, I was pleased that you actually took the time to walk around the streets with me to look at things that you were going to be putting into this matrix. So I'm really pleased. It also talks to this committee, which actually made the recommendation for active travel to be considered, which I think is really important. I've got 2 questions and a final point as well. First thing is about 20 miles an hour. So I noticed there's a differential between A roads, B roads and C roads. So I'm assuming that speed can have an impact on the quality of the road surface or an impact on it. So has 20 miles an hour made any difference, discernible difference yet? Be interested in that. And the second thing is more are we doing enough? So we spent a lot of energy concerning ourselves with cyclists and whether they'd be driving into potholes. And I've noticed the defects in cycling desire line gets 10 points. So if that's all that's wrong with this road, does that mean this road doesn't get any work doing on it? Because if a cyclist does hit a defect and it's bad enough to flip them off their bike, the impact is more likely to be significant, death, serious injury, than it would be for a car. So it'll be really interesting that. And the point, Chair, just the final point, is that pavement parking was legislation that this Welsh Government was going to put into this term and stop doing it. So I think just to note that we should be there, that should be protected, but they've taken it out of their legislation for this term, which I think is a real mistake. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Nathan, are you able to respond to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hooper. To pick up on your first point about 20 mile an hour and are we doing enough? Is it making a difference? I personally think it's maybe a little bit too soon to comment on this. We are noticing vehicle speeds, but I think that the weight of the vehicles hasn't changed, and the direction of these vehicles, especially the larger ones, they're still continuing to go to these destinations to drop off. So I just think we're maybe a little bit too soon just yet. To pick up on the second point then about are we doing enough with the desire lines, I think everyone's very different. I got two young boys and they won't ride on the road. They're not comfortable in riding on the road. They prefer to stay on the pavement. And everybody has different abilities and different sort of their comfort zones. So by picking up on the desire lines, I think the majority, and I might be wrong, but I don't think I am. The majority of people are generally riding curbside rather than in the middle of the lane or maybe in the middle of the carriageway. So by desire lines, I was sort of conscious of any issues maybe near ironwork, such as gully gratings, for example, or maybe leaves or debris or heavy rutting from parked vehicles. So we were trying to capture things such as that.
Councillor Hooper, did you want to come back in?
Thanks, Nathan. I think the point that I'm trying to... So we've got a maximum score that comes out of this. And the point I'm making is that the cycle desire line is only 10 out of 300, maximum score of 390. So, and the point being, is that sufficient given the impact of somebody falling over on a bike is likely to, is more likely to be serious, cause serious injury than it would be if you're in a car, motorcycle or any other form of transport, and pedestrians perhaps as well, because the cyclist is going at higher speed. So the challenge, given this matrix is what we're going to agree to tonight, the challenge is 10 points sufficient given the impact that we could be seeing on these particular individuals. So as it stands at the moment, if there is a rut and it is bad, and that's all that's wrong with the road, my review of this is that you wouldn't do anything about it.
Thank you, Councillor. So a question about weighting, taking the point that you made at the beginning of your presentation, Nathan, and this is a relatively new area for us as a council in terms of including this aspect within the assessment process. But thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In response, Councillor Hooper, I think the weighting of 10, I'm more than happy to sort of review it maybe in a set period. I think I would suggest that as first instance, because I think this matrix will maybe evolve over time. But also as well, I think if you look at column G for the active travel routes, if it's a proposed route, it's going to get an additional points of 15. And if it's already an active travel route, it's going to have a point of 30 points. So potentially we could have a location where we have got defects along the desire line. They wouldn't just get 10 points, it would potentially get 40 points. Thank you.
I see no other hands in terms of people wanting to come in on this issue other than the Cabinet member. So, Councillor Wilson, I'm going to give you the last comment on this report and then I'll sum up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members of the Scrutiny Committee, and your comments tonight. I think they've been very insightful, and I'm very pleased that we've agreed to take on the view of the last Scrutiny Committee last year about putting active travel to more prominence and actually into the scoring system at last, which I think is a good, timely thing to do. I also note the changes to highway code, which means that cyclists can move to middle of the road if they so wish, as well. And I think that will help the situation, especially on busy roads, especially where there are 20 miles per hour roads. I think that is a helpful thing for them to do. But obviously, they've got to feel confident enough to do that. And I understand that lots of cyclists don't necessarily want to do that. But can I thank you all for your forbearance? And, I'm very pleased to present this tonight to Scrutiny Committee. And can I also thank the officers as well? So thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much, Nathan, for bringing the report before us this evening. I think I've got two, I think they're both recommendations for officers as opposed to changes to the plan itself. One is that the typo in 2.9 of the report be amended to ensure that an accurate figure about the available budget is in the public domain. And the other is that, as you've already agreed, Nathan, that as this is relatively new, that over time officers will review the weighting of 10 for cycling, taking into account the potential increased impact if a cyclist were to hit some damage on the path and hurt themselves. So both of those recommendations, is committee happy to agree those? Councillor Hooper.
Broadly, Chair, obviously the first one I support. I think the second one, we need some sort of time limit on there, so it can't just be some time in the future. So I think given that this, I think, is a serious point, I would have preferred to have argued for it to change tonight, but accepting the fact that Nathan said he'll review it, I think perhaps even something that's as short term as in a year's time to review it, I think that would be an appropriate timescale, but it definitely needs a timescale for review.
Nathan, can I take your advice in relation to that? What would, given that this is a new process, a new waiting process, what would be a reasonable timescale in your view for us to include in that recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think 12 months is unrealistic, and I would agree with Councillor Hooper.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Hooper, that recommendation will be amended accordingly. Thank you. Councillor Ernest, are you wanting to come in on this? Because I am wanting to close this debate and move us on.
Of course you are, Chairman. Yes, I understand that. No, really, I'm just coming back to Appendix B, which does actually give the marking, the scoring, if you like. I was just a bit concerned that under column G, it's Appendix B, column G, active travel routes. If it's not on the map, there is no score at all. Whereas proposed route is 15 and current route is 30. But I'm a little bit concerned there should be a score of 0, simply because a highway is not on an active travel route. I would have thought at the very minimum it deserves a score of maybe 5 or 10. I'm just wondering if we could clear that point before we may not vote on it, but before we get consent on the plan.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. My understanding is that where there's a score of 0 on the matrix, that's because that particular stretch of the highway has not yet been assessed. But Nathan, could you respond to that? Thank you. And then I am going to draw this item to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Ernest. Other column IDs within the table do have a scoring of 0. For example, the scanner survey data, and this could be where it's green and it's in fantastic condition, so it doesn't necessarily need a weighting. But what I would say is, if the engineer's assessment would pick up any sort of any of the condition, you could argue, you could give it 5 points, but I don't necessarily think it's going to have a huge contributing factor, because if the location being assessed is of a shocking condition or of a poor condition, it would be weighted quite heavily in other areas within the matrix.
Well, thank you, Nathan. I'd simply
Councillor,
like to see a
Councillor
score.
Innes,
I
sorry.
kept it a minimal score.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you, Councillor Innes. Can I suggest then that rather than tonight querying the scoring, what we're asked to consider is the changes to the process, which I think we've considered. Can I suggest that if there are any specific concerns arising from the weighting that's in the report, that members can raise that outside of scrutiny with officers? Otherwise, I move that we note the report. And is there a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Thank you, Nathan. And as I said earlier on, please convey the various thanks that you've heard from committee members. Take them for yourself and convey them back to your team. Thank you. You're very welcome to stay for the remainder of scrutiny, but equally, if you're not engaged in any of the other reports, do feel free to leave and enjoy your evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. So now we move on to agenda item 5. This report concerns the coastal monitoring update. It provides technical information about the coast is monitored, and it's before us tonight for our consideration and for us to note. To take us through this, we have Colin Smith and Clive Moon, the Head of Neighbourhood Services and the Engineering Manager for Environment, respectively. So again, welcome to you both, and over to you. I believe you have a short presentation for us. Thank you.
We do. Thank you, Chair. If I could have the presentation. Thank you. I'd just take the opportunity tonight to bring some of the report to life with some better pictures and also go into detail. If I trusted the web connection a bit more, I'd probably try and fly through some 3D models and things like that, but I think I'll stick with the static images tonight. This update, we're building on the reports that have been presented tonight. The Vale coastline, why do we monitor? We've got 45 kilometres of open coastline. Approximately 4 kilometres of that coastline is defended. We also have approximately 572 properties at tidal flood risk or at risk of coastal erosion around the Vale coastline, although I would note that the majority of those properties are defended up to a 1 in 200 year sort of standard service or from that level of event from flooding, and I'll come on to that later. Around the coastline, we have in excess of £15.8 million worth of land and property at risk, and that figure is probably an underestimate because it comes from the S&P, so it needs inflating to get it to present day values. We also have critical infrastructure around the coastline, including the Aberthorpe Power Station, or former Aberthorpe Power Station, and Barry Sewage Pumping Station. And obviously we have tourism and recreation, which brings a lot to the Vale and for the residents of the Vale. On the right of the slide there, we can see a couple of examples of coastal erosion in action. I think in 2011, we had problems with mobile home, sort of park homes teetering on the edge of cliff. In 2013-14 winter, we also have flooding down at Penarth Esplanade. And both of those are taken from the press and obviously get a lot of attention at the time when those events do happen, but we prefer to prepare in advance. Next slide, please. Just to put the monitoring we do in a strategic context, obviously we're investing in public purse. Flood and coastal erosion risk is managed in accordance with the National Strategy for Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management in Wales. That document is produced by the Welsh Government. We implement that on the coastline via the 2 shoreline management plans. We have the Severn Estuary Plan and the Lavernock Point to St Anne's Head Plan. Both of those set the policy for how we manage the coastline and also contain actions which help officers to sort of focus on key issues and also identify areas where we want to collaborate with other risk management authorities or other organisations around the coastline. Next slide, please. I'd be remiss not to mention climate change, given COP29's happening at the present. UK coastal flood risk is expected to increase over the 21st century and beyond under all climate change scenarios. Whatever we do now is locked in terms of sea level rise to some extent. There's likely to be an increase in frequency and magnitude of extreme water levels. Increased future flood risk will be dominated by the effects of mean sea level rise. And the Vale coastline could experience sea level increases in the order of 1 metre by 2100. So quite sobering. Next slide, please. Just to come back to the flood risk, what I would say is, to put it in context, it's a slightly busy slide, but the top line in that table where it says source of flooding sea, we actually have some significant defences or structures that protect a large number of those properties from the majority of the properties at risk of tidal flooding are either on the River Cadoxton or in that catchment or in Penarth behind the Cardiff Barrage. Both of those defences deliver a sort of a 1 in 200 year standard of service, which is why on the left hand side there's only a total of 6 properties at medium or high risk of flooding, whereas on the right hand side there's significantly more. The overall total, if you can add up that quickly, actually matches the same because neither of the defences would totally prevent a 1 in 1,000 year return period event from affecting properties. What I would say is that those figures, if people are looking at that, it also helps us put it in context that actually we have relatively, or not relatively few, but less properties at risk of flooding from the sea than we do from rivers and surface water. What I would say is that there's some double counting in those figures. It's very difficult to pull the different sources apart. So don't add all those figures up in your head because there's probably 350 odd houses that are sort of affected by multiple sources in there. If we were to go to a scheme level and start looking at detailed areas, obviously property counts are developed more on the basis of modelling and other information, just to make sure that we know who's at risk and how we justify a scheme. Next slide, please. That covers flood risk. What I would say is that Natural Resources Wales actually publish flood risk on their website. They also publish coastal erosion risk mapping on their website as well. The link's at the bottom of that slide. Fortunately for the Vale, there aren't many residential or commercial properties actually forecast to be at risk of coastal erosion. However, we monitor the coastline, and one of the reasons we monitor the coastline is to make sure that those figures stay relevant and up to date. With climate change and increased sea levels, there could be a change in storminess, wave action hitting the coast. So there's sort of a feedback mechanism to take that monitoring data and in the longer term feed into things like the Shoreline Management Plan, National Coastal Erosion Risk Management data sets that are used to manage the coastline and allocate funding most appropriately. Next slide, please. The Vale's very fortunate to be part of a consortium. The Vale of Morgan acts as host authority for the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre. Our current team is there across the top of the slides. We've got Gwyn Nelson, the programme manager, and then the rest of the team. The centre is sort of steered by a consortium of local authorities and WLGA. So we've got the Vale, Glamorgan, Gwynedd Council, Conwy Council, and the WLGA all sitting on a consortium, helping to steer the direction of that group. The purpose of the group is to monitor coastal change, to inform risk management decisions, while promoting continuous learning and education for all stakeholders. And I know today Gwyn was in schools teaching children about sea level rise. So not the majority of the work they do, but a good element is actually getting out and dealing with primary schools, liaising in an education sort of setting to try and raise awareness with the sort of younger people living in the Vale. The current funding period for the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre is 2021 to 26. We've currently got approved funding just under £2 million. That's likely to increase over £2 million next year if we have a funding increase in line with the previous years. That's a little quirk of the funding. I've included a couple of examples. There's an annual report available on the website. That's updated obviously every year. Also, the poster that's displayed in the middle there was actually a stakeholder workshop held in Cardiff last month, which Gwyn coordinated, and we had most of the maritime local authorities sent representatives from around the coastline. We had academia present. We had academic speakers as well as other people attend the workshop. Welsh Government were in sort of attendance as well as representatives from the Flood and Coastal Erosion Committee. That was a really good opportunity, and the WCMC acts as a sort of a coordinating body or a facilitator for discussions between all the different authorities that manage the coastline to try and sort of tease out what's working well and what's not working so well, and how can we improve that going forward. Next slide, please. The Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre handle the strategic Pan Wales monitoring programme. Within the Vale, this slide shows where we actually have monitoring undertaken through that programme in the Vale, so that's funded separately directly from Welsh Government into the WCMC. I should read off my notes as I'm not very good with the colours there. We have biannual profile surveys around the beach at Penarth, Aberthaw and Colhew in Llantyck Major. On the Bull Cliff section of coastline, we have a baseline every 5 years. I'll come on to what these mean in a little bit more detail in a second. And at the Nap and Whitmore Bay, we survey the beach with a baseline every 5 years, and then we also do a biannual profile survey up and down the beach. Next slide, please. That data collection is coordinated and delivered through the WCMC, so they procure the surveys through, usually for our part of the world, external contractors around other parts of the Welsh coastline. Some councils undertake those surveys in-house. We do it through the WCMC occasionally, but quite often with external contractors. There's a set specification to make sure that that data is consistent and to an appropriate accuracy. So it's comparable over time, and we can trust the data we're collecting. They have a set various methodologies that sort of approve the collection of that data as well. That could be an old-fashioned way where we have someone with a measuring device walking up a profile on the beach, collecting levels. A baseline is where you collect more points across the entire surface at a given sort of density of data. Recently, people have started to use ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, and drones as well to collect that data in different ways. Next slide, please. If anyone's ever done any surveying at some time in their past, some of these instruments might look familiar, others might not. Over the years, we've tried various innovative new techniques for collecting data. So we've gone from basic, it used to be with a level, and then it moved to GPS to measure a profile up the beach. There's a laser scanner, top middle on the screen there, that collects a point cloud of data across the whole surface at a very high resolution. And the next one over is something called a mobile laser scanner. On someone's back on a trike. That's actually an e-trike that we power through solar panel at the Outwards Depot. We use that less often than we used to, but that also collected high density data across the entire beach surface. And then on the right hand side of the slide is our in-house drone. We actually have 3 drones available for surveys. That's the largest drone, which carries a LiDAR sensor as well. It can carry a photogrammetry sensor as well. Unfortunately, although it looks like fun, it's a lot quicker to fly with the drone than it is to cycle around the beach on a bike and get everywhere. So over the years, we sort of modified the approach. Laser scanning also is quite intensive. You need more people on the beach. So we're tending towards more drone-based surveys. Although I make it sound very easy, the WCMC in the background, any designated sites, they've had to liaise with organisations such as Natural Resources Wales to make sure that things are as simple as they don't frighten birds, breeding bird populations, things like that, when people fly drones in the wrong area. Also with the ATVs to make sure that we don't disrupt wildlife unintentionally. So behind the scenes, the WCMC have taken on a lot of the workload in terms of negotiating with NRW, local area teams to make these surveys happen. The high density data sets can also be reduced down to simple profile data, so we can sort of extract that information and compare it to the older data sets. Next slide, please. Most of this data is available on the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre website. We've recently collaborated with the Office for National Statistics, and one of the team members has actually created this dashboard, and it's now embedded on the WCMC website. It works at 3 different levels. At the high level there, it gives an indication of at a sort of a survey unit level of how variable the beach levels are in that frontage. Next slide, please. At the next level down, you can drill down to individual profile level. So I've clicked on a profile there in Whitmore Bay and Barry Island. So top middle, it's actually giving the area under a cross section, so the beach down to a set level, and then it's looking at how the area of the beach is changing over time. Although it's slightly going down there, it's pretty much the trend is level. It's not decreasing very much, and if you take off one critical survey there, it actually flips the other way. But it gives a good indication of how we use this information, and now it's more accessible to people to sort of have a look and get an idea of trends on the beach. There's other information also available, so that the data is available all the way around the whole of the Welsh coastline. Obviously, we can access the Vale data through this portal. Next slide, please. And then the next tab down allows us to look at hydrodynamic data. So again, we can look at the cross-sectional area trend is at top right on there, but I've actually clicked on an event in 2002, I think there, where there was an increased wave energy event. So the team have actually written this, so you can look at when we've got a very drawn down beach, we've got less material there. Why was that? Is it a winter profile? It's hard to see on there, but actually the summer, autumn, spring and winter profiles are all coloured up differently. So you can just get a high level overview of, are all the winter surveys lower than all the summer surveys, and just get your eye in on the trends on the beach. Coastal monitoring is a slightly black art, and you do need to take the sort of wider context into account. I know, for example, at Whitmore Bay, if I'd have picked another profile on the other corner of the bay, it would probably show a sort of a mirror trend, and that's because sometimes the bay reorientates in reaction to changes in sort of wave direction. So material can move around in an embayment, but the overall volume of material in the bay is probably staying fairly stable. We'd be more concerned if the overall volume of material in an embayment was dropping. And this data is the start, but actually the richer, more denser data sets I'll come on to in a second, we use those to work up full volumetric assessments of how much material we've got in critical locations around the coastline. Next slide, please. In addition to the core Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre data collection, or the programme, there's also other data sets available around the coastline. This slide's slightly busy, but it shows coverage of LiDAR data, I believe, collected by NRW as part of the Pan Wales data collection, recent data collection. There's also little clock symbols on there. That's usually us within the Vale collecting additional data sets that weren't collected through the programme. So there'll be additional scan data, profile data historically that may have come through from coastal groups. This page on the WCMC website just acts as a signpost, so academia, consultants working in the area can get through to the data. Even if it isn't collected by the centre, it just gives them a signpost to know that other data sets do exist. Next slide, please. Within the Vale, we also have one location where we collect wave and tide data. That isn't funded through the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre, it's funded directly by the Vale. It's installed on the end of Penarth Pier, which I saw in the background to Councillor Wilson's display earlier. We collect both water level and wave height there. It's a slightly unusual configuration because the end of the pier dries out, so a little bit of clever maths has to go in to correct some of the parameters we get out of there. But we monitor that largely as a result. We know that we've got some flood risk there, and it allows us to do sort of calibrate and validate some of the wave overtopping modelling that's been done previously, and also inform future studies if we ever want to look at the wave energy hitting that frontage. Next slide, please. Although I've touched on the various different types of monitoring in the main report that was submitted today, I just thought I'd put some nicer pictures in as well. Recently, we've undertaken inshore multi-beam bathymetric surveys. In about 2018, 2019, the whole of the coastline was surveyed in collaboration with the Maritime Coast Guard Agency. We've repeated that survey recently between 2022 and 2023 around Barry Island and the Nap. That's because there are sort of concerns in those areas or changes in the SNP policy in those areas. So we wanted to supplement our understanding of how materials moving around there. The information collected through the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre, some of the multi-beam was coordinated through the programme, but generally it just goes down to Mean Low Water Springs. These surveys push those surveys much deeper down. I'm not sure if it comes through, but you can actually see the wave cut or the rock, the pattern in the rock at the bottom of the bottom left oval-shaped picture there of the bathymetry. So actually we're covering all the mobile sediment in the embayments there and then getting down onto the rock. And that when we add that to the topographic data on the beach, it allows us to try and quantify how much material we've got in the area. On the right-hand side is actually the sunset during one of the 2022 surveys. I think it was a lovely day to be on the water. Next slide, please. This is a very long, probably hard to make out on the screen, very long survey. I think it's approximately 4 kilometres. You may just be able to make out Penarth Pier about sort of 2/3 of the way along towards the right-hand end. We've got Cardiff Barrage in the distance. That's actually an overview of just over 260 million colorised points that were collected with a drone in November 2023. So the resolution of that survey, the accuracy, I think it's within about 20 mil accuracy, 20 to 25 mil. The spatial resolution, there shouldn't be any gaps in there bigger than sort of 5 to 10 centimetres, although you may in occasion get some shadowing. Things have moved on, whereas before we would have had at best to set up a terrestrial laser scanner and jump along the coast. We might do 1 kilometre in a day. I think they flew that in about an hour, something like that, with a drone. So we can cover a significant area of the frontage. We can survey the cliffs, we can survey the beach, all in one hit on a low tide, and then we can look at that data later back in the office and actually compare and pull out other deliverables. Next slide, please. So one example there is in November 2019, we had a cliff fall, or just prior to that, we had a cliff fall near Forest Road in Penarth, which is shown top left. Bottom right there is actually the outputs from the November 2023 survey. And although it's not exactly, the alignment's not the same, you can see that actually a lot of the debris cone or the material that's gone from the cliff has actually eroded away. Next slide, please. See if the magic works. There we go. This is a slightly different location further along by Cosmoston. It's hard to make out on the slide, but actually on the left-hand side, there's quite an obvious fall with a debris cone at the bottom of the cliff. What we're also picking up in the right-hand oval is a hot spot on the cliff face, and that's actually where we're probably getting weathering of softer material in the cliff. That's just trickling down the cliff over a sort of longer period rather than going in one big fall, there's no sign of any debris on the beach. The next tide that comes in high enough up the beach will move that away. So when we do a visual inspection of the coastline, no one's shouting about the sort of the long linear section that's eroding away. It's not being picked up. So actually, by using this scan data, as well as picking up the obvious falls and seeing how quickly they move, we're also just able to now start picking up sort of smaller weathering sort of areas of erosion around the cliff. And the intention is over the long term, we'll try and feed back into these high level policies and sort of national coastal erosion risk mapping sort of products to check, are those estimates of coastal erosion correct? Or actually at certain locations, are we picking up more erosion, less erosion? What have we got around the Vale coastline? Next slide, please. Something totally different. This is being coordinated to the Welsh Coastal Monitoring Centre again, but it's the CoastNap monitoring. This technique came out of Australia. It's actually, you may have seen it if you've walked around the Vale coastline at Whitmore Bay and also in Penarth. We've got stands set up on the coastline at key locations. We encourage citizen science. We want residents or visitors to put their phone on there, take a picture, submit it following the instructions on the signs, and actually we can generate, well, now we're generating time-lapse videos effectively using those information. I couldn't get it to display in real time on here, but the guys in the team have done some amazing work, and they've actually made it so whatever camera is used on there, it rectifies the images, so the things in the middle of the image are always in the same location. So the Eastern Shelter, for example, is in one of those photos. It looks the same in every image. It sort of warps the photos. It's very clever stuff. And then we've been able to generate sort of videos as a result of that, or time-lapse sort of imagery, sort of cycling through to see how things change. We can't be everywhere all the time. They're relatively expensive to undertake even a simple profile survey. We have to put people on the beach walking up and down with survey equipment or put a drone in the air. This allows us to get a more frequent snapshot at key locations of how the beach is evolving. Next slide, please. Almost at the end of the presentation, but what I would say is that there's still a place for sort of more basic assessments of our structures around the coastline. So while we're monitoring the cliffs, we're monitoring the beach, we're also monitoring the defences. We do something called a T98 inspection on sea defences to monitor the condition of those assets. We have a flood asset database, or an asset database AMX product that we log that information in. So we'll do repeat surveys at a set frequency on sea defences to ascertain what condition they're in, and log that and monitor how it's deteriorating over time. And that then informs how we manage that structure and invest money in undertaking repairs or replacement works. We do still use some of the different alternative novel data to supplement that. The bottom right image on there is actually a 3D scan of the Eastern Prom, or one of the ramps down, looking at the Eastern Prom. Someone's walked along with a mobile phone and a clever bit of software and actually generated a 3D model from that, so we can then measure the height of the beach against the wall from that a lot more cheaply than we can if we have to send a dedicated survey team out. And then finally, that's just an example of a piece of software, Pix4D, that we use. That's down at Swanbridge, which is another high priority location for monitoring, where we've got coastal defences defending the highway there in varying states of repair. On the left-hand side, that's actually a point cloud, so it's individual colorized points. On the right-hand side is one of the images that we use to generate that. So there's, I don't know how many, probably hundreds, if not 1,000 images that are all merged together. Some very clever maths behind the scenes goes on, and all those flat images are then turned into a full 3D model that if I'd been braver, I could have spun around on the screen and showed everyone. Next slide, please. And then just to finish up, I think that's a very whistle-stop tour of monitoring on the Vale coastline. We do probably do more. Some of it's mentioned in the report, but I'm always welcome if anyone wants to discuss that, and members want to come and discuss what monitoring's happening. It's my pet topic. I quite like talking around that, so I can go into more detail. But our future aims are to establish a consistent and routine monitoring regime around the coastline, to use that data to inform risk-based approach to managing our coastal interests as a council. To continue our support as a council for the Welsh Coastal Monitoring Centre, and to continue hosting that subject to Welsh Government funding, and to continue our collaboration with academia as well, because we've seen some real improvements in the monitoring we're able to undertake because of those links with academia through the WCMC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clive, for bringing that report to life for us. Any questions or comments? Councillor William, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. The first thing I would like to do I know every time we get an officer report, everybody says, oh, thank you for the report, but I really mean it. This is a comprehensive report. It's taken massive amounts of research and probably an equally massive amount of time to put together, probably years worth of research, actually. I'm particularly impressed. The trouble is, though, it raises an awful lot of questions. The first thing, I think I've got about 4 questions, but I'll make them quick.
Councillor, can I ask you just to ask 2 and allow the officer to answer, and then you can ask your other 2 so
Good
we
idea.
don't lose them.
Thank you. Okay, so first one is quite easy. Your starter for 10. I note in the report that Jackson's Bay to the Nap was inspected between 2022 and 2023, and I know that you do periodic inspections anyway. Jackson's Bay continues to suffer rockfalls regularly. Now, I used to have signage there to warn people. It's no longer there. I'm assuming that Jackson's Bay now fits the criteria and therefore qualifies for new signage. So that's question number 1. And secondly, let me scroll down. In the presentation, you also mentioned that some of the beaches were surveyed, including the Nap and Whitmore Bay. You'll recall that following a motion brought to this scrutiny committee by myself some years ago, we started to collect data on sand levels and possible sand loss in connection with coastal erosion and dredging. Is there a pattern that you've gleaned from this, or is it still just too early to tell? And as part of that question, have the levels improved since the dredging was curtailed? And if so, can you provide us with levels sampled over the years? So I'll leave it at those 2 for now.
Thank you. It sounds like the end bit of that second question might be slightly too detailed for us this evening, but Clive might prove me wrong. Clive, Colin, are you able to address those? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor William. I'll pick up the first question and Clive the second question. I've recently met a voluntary group at Jackson's Bay to look at some collaboration working on cleaning the beach and improving the area. And as part of that, we went through a signage audit, and it included the actual cliff face and some of the concerns that were raised by residents, but also some of the furniture there, the signage going down to the ramp. So we're undertaking a full audit there at the moment, and with an intention to including or improving and installing new signage early in the new year and in ready for the new bathing season.
Thank you. Clive, please.
Thank you, Chair. And then picking up the second point, Whitmore Bay and Jackson's Bay and the pattern of erosion in that area, or more specifically Whitmore Bay, it's not a straightforward answer. I think what we haven't detected is a massive rebound since the local dredging was sort of ceased some time ago. So we're not seeing beach levels increase significantly. We've got topographic profile data covering the top of the beach that goes back along 2 profiles for decades now, so quite a significant amount of time. That was actually one of those I put in the presentation, and I think it may also be in the report. There's a slight decrease in cross-sectional area under those profiles, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily significant. What we do pick up is quite a lot of movement at the top of the beach, and the CoSnap data is highlighting that as well. As we get the photos, sometimes we can see the foundation of the wall, sometimes you can't, it gets buried. There's a lot of movement there. But actually the overall sort of area which we can sort of infer a volume of material from is not declining significantly or very rapidly. I mentioned in there that we've done additional bathymetric surveys. One of the reasons for that is to expand our understanding of the sediment budget in the area. So what's the volume of material there? I think I said in the main report that we're looking potentially in the next couple of years to undertake a survey of the underlying geology, so we can actually work out where's the solid bedrock underneath the bay. Once we can use that as a basis, we can then calculate the actual volume of material in the embayment and try and work out how that's moving around. And it won't just be one embayment we look at. We're sort of looking around the corner at Jackson's Bay as well, and at the Old Harbour to the west. There's lots of data sets, and unfortunately, we don't have a magic pot of money, so we can't just say survey everything instantly now, go. We've supplemented it as we've been able to with multi-beam surveys when we had some money available through Welsh Government and other sources. But we have picked up some localized trends. So I know we've compared the two bathymetric surveys, and you can actually, we just touched the point where the channel's dredged into the harbour to the east of Jackson. So you can actually see an impact just about on the edge of that survey. What we're not picking up is a big trend on the beach yet, or well, we may not pick it up, but what we've got to consider is that if sea level rise continues, the beach would naturally want to retreat. Unfortunately, in Jackson's Bay, there's a cliff behind it. In Whitmore Bay, there's a defence behind it. So the beach can't sort of evolve naturally to an increase in sea level rise. So part of the reason for collecting the additional monitoring data is to look at how is that system going to evolve in sort of under the forcing of increased sea level and storminess as we go forward. So I think that it answers the question. So yeah, more work to be done. All of the data I've discussed is the profile data is available through the Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre website. So this top of the beach, you can look at the trends through those profiles.
Thank you, Clive. Councillor William, you had two other questions.
Yeah, thank you. And it leads me on beautifully on to the next one, because it was going to be about the bathymetric surveys. I wasn't quite sure, because remember, you're talking to a layman here, so I might be asking a rather silly question. In that, with the bathymetric survey, I wasn't sure whether you were testing for something or just looking at the compositions of stuff you find. So my question was going to be, as well as sewage, what were you testing for? But it might not have been that. It might have been just composition. So that was question number one. The other question was whether you'd ever tested radiation levels, and if so, how do they compare with levels further west? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Clive, are you able to pick those up? Thank you.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. With regards to the bathymetric data, it's a good question. We're actually measuring the height of the seabed, or the depth of the seabed down. And then that's corrected so that we can in effect we can generate a terrain model that carries on under the water in effect. So we're not actually testing the properties of the seabed. You can do that, and you can do sediment sampling. We may do that in future. The different techniques we're going to use to identify the bedrock under the beach. That may be sort of non-intrusive, using the sort of techniques that can penetrate through the sediment, or it may be a bit more old-fashioned where you have to whack something down through the beach till you hit something hard, and then measure how deep it is. So there's a variety of techniques. You can do those off boats as well with pingers or boomers and different systems for different depths of water. So you can profile down through the sediment as well. But here, I think as I showed in one of those slides, you can actually see the bedrock because of the high currents. It's swept fairly clear just off the toe of the beach. So actually, it's a fairly straightforward sort of problem to answer, as long as we collect all the data sets fairly at a similar time, so that we can sort of create an overall terrain model of the beach levels and the foreshore. In terms of radiation monitoring, no, that's not something we would do in terms of water quality. And coming back to the first question, no, we're not actively testing for sewage as part of those surveys or water quality. I think that would sort of move over to NRW's remit in terms of water quality testing.
Yeah, we had a very good presentation from
Councillor,
them.
did you want to come back in?
Oh, sorry.
Can you? Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm going to bring others in, Councillor, so unless it's a follow-up
I'll just
question.
wrap up. Yeah, just to say, I noted the sewage presentation we got from NRW before. Yeah, thank you for that. I'll mull over the answers. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Champion, please. Thank you for your patience.
Sorry, just put myself out there. You mentioned the fact that the water levels are going to rise by a metre in 75 years, so that's about a foot by 2050. How's that going to impact on low-level land, Aberthaw, where last meeting we had a presentation on the future of Aberthaw, and perhaps by 2021 there won't be any Aberthaw to have a future?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And if I can add a subsidiary to that question, Clive, in terms of the monitoring, where the indications are and where we know that there is a risk of coastal erosion with the subsequent risks arising in relation to flooding, is there anything being done to mitigate that? Is there anything proactive being done to address that? Or is it a matter of simply monitoring? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, to address Councillor Champion's question, Yes, sea level rise isn't linear, so it's sort of an accelerating curve. So it's going to get more rapid the further into the future we go.
Okay.
Currently, the best sort of wide-scale, national-scale data sets that are available are published by Natural Resources Wales. Those are based on the UKCP 2018 data set. So the latest round of IPCC AR6 results changes slightly. It looks at more scenarios where they look at disastrous ice sheet melting and factors such as that, but actually they're the very, very sort of worst case scenarios. The underlying sort of predictions haven't been significantly updated recently. So coming back to what NRW do, there's actually the best way to get at it is actually to look at the planning data sets for flood risk. Those allow for 100 years worth of climate change predictions within those sort of flood extents. And from memory, Aberthaw wouldn't be significantly adversely impacted. I think you gave a sort of an intermediate date, sort of said 50 years or something like that. I don't think they wouldn't publish that. It would be 100 years out into the future that they sort of project. But there is national scale sort of modelling of flood risk and the impact of sea level rise on the flood extents. That is being undertaken. Coming into what are we doing about it in defences, it depends where you are around the coastline and who the asset owner is. So for Aberthaw, we've got the city, Cardiff City Region group that would be responsible for that. Around the Vale coastline, we have the Swansea and Carmarthen Bay Coastal Engineering Group and also the Severn Estuary Coastal Group. I'm actually chair of the Swansea and Carmarthen Bay Group. We have actions to engage actively with the owners of Aberthaw Power Station to make sure that they're putting in place appropriate arrangements to deal with flood risk and how that will change over time. But ultimately it'll be down to private landowners if they own and maintain the assets. In other areas where you've got assets, the 4 kilometres of defended coastlines, a lot of that is defending properties and communities. In those areas, as sea level rise increases, the responsible risk management authority would then look to increase that standard of protection, generally in accordance with the shoreline management plan policy. The only exception, which affects a lot of tidal flood risk in the Vale, would be the Cadoxton outlet. That's not, I don't think, specifically mentioned in the shoreline management plan, but NRW maintain that asset and it delivers a 1 in 200 year standard of service. At some point in the future, as a risk management authority, that they would sort of look at that and say, okay, we've had X amount of sea level rise, we now need to increase the standard of service, and they would have to put a project together to sort of bid in and improve the standard of protection there. Likewise for erosion, if we've got defences, say along the Penarth frontage where we've got defences in place, we would look at that as an asset owner maintainer. As a Coast Protection Authority under the Coast Protection Act, we would look at those defences and sort of the reason we do the coastal defence inspections is to look at how those deteriorate over time. Unfortunately, they never get any better. They tend to sort of get affected by the erosion and degrade over time. We would then look at using either capital funding in the future or potentially revenue funding to maintain those assets as we go along. All the different locations around the coastline will have a slightly different sort of scenario, but generally, as a new update comes out for sea level rise predictions, that would be sort of accounted for within the shoreline management plan sort of processes. So there will probably be a new action by the coastal groups to have a look at that and see whether there's key areas that are really badly affected by that. Otherwise, it would be down to sort of individual asset owners. So it might be at Penarth Esplanade, it would be the council because we're responsible for the promenade. We'd have a look at that. The current predictions, although we get overtopping at Penarth, aren't for significant detriment down there in terms of sort of flood risk because it's relatively sheltered and up the channel as well, so the wave energy is unlikely to increase, but we would continue to monitor the latest data. So if suddenly a prediction came out that said we're going to have a significant amount more sea level rise, that would be picked up in future. I don't think we've got any examples on our coastline, but in areas where we've got change in SMP policy, if it's hold the line, I think the Penarth frontage policy is actually to hold the line but not increase the height of the defence, so it will protect against erosion, but the level of overtopping would increase gradually over time. In other areas, there may be a policy in place to actually hold it and increase the level of overtopping protection. I don't think we've got any of those from memory in the Vale, but all of that information is available on the Coastal Group website and in the SMP documents, so it's publicly available for people to have a look at that, so they can see how we manage the coastline in terms of policy.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Councillor, did that address your question or was there a follow-up?
Yes, it was a very full answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Prothero, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Clive. It's a very interesting report, very technically challenging, though I may say, for us laymen. My question really is how we are applying this risk-based methodology. My ward is St Bride's, so it is the coast from St Donat's all the way around to Ogmore. In this report, I can't see any reference to anything that's happening there, but obviously we have challenging cliffs that are eroding. We have cliff falls on a weekly basis, and I would imagine we are still at risk of flooding. So my question is, are we doing any kind of monitoring west of Lantwick Major? And also, how do we define a local priority area? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Clive, please.
Thank you, Councillor Prothero. It's a part of the coastline I know quite well. We are undertaking some monitoring, but not as much monitoring. The Wales Coastal Monitoring Centre, once you get west of Lantwick, don't undertake any regular repeat monitoring. That's because the score's too low. Where we've got, I know we've got the coastal footpath at risk, but we've largely got agricultural land at risk of sort of erosion. It doesn't score highly enough because we don't have enough funding to monitor everything everywhere. We have to prioritise it to residential areas or high-risk areas where there's high-value assets or large numbers of people. There are sort of broad-scale data sets available. So the multi-beam bathymetric data, that extended across the whole frontage because the material doesn't just sit on the coastline, it also moves along the coastline. So we are interested in the west of the Vale because some of that material will move eastwards into other areas. So we're interested in how that's moving around. There's Pan Wales LiDAR available. So that was recently undertaken via NRW and it's sort of publicly available. So there are broad scale data sets giving us the sort of the levels of the beach. Generally in the west of the Vale, there isn't the significant risk to properties. We did mention flood risk. There is some flood risk at Cwm Hugh, but once you come west of that, actually we don't have significant flood risk, definitely not to properties. The footpath may be impacted by overtopping in car parks, may be impacted by material being thrown in, but we're not talking about sort of properties being internally flooded as a result of that. That tends to be focused more to the east of the Vale. So we sort of tailor our monitoring. We still do visual inspections. We still engage with sort of local landowners. We engage with the sort of heritage coast team, the rangers, and other landowners. We also sort of engage through the coastal group, and there's new coastal groups that have been set up in the Vale recently that we sort of engage with to try and, I suppose, get best value out of the monitoring. So if we know that these data sets are there, we have undertaken some pilot trials of the UAV technology down at Dunraven, Sundown. So we surveyed the beach there. So although we haven't got properties at risk, we have got a highway going down there behind the cliff. We've got heritage assets or ancient monuments on top of the hill as well. So we actually took the opportunity. It had a good combination. We had natural cliffs, hard defences, a gravel beach at the back or a cobble beach at the back, and a sand foreshore. So we use that for some of our trials. So we have collected data there, but it's not part of the ongoing programme going forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Prothero, did you want to come back in on that?
No, and I do appreciate the situation, and thank you for the clarity with what we're doing this for. The cliff falls, though, that they are frequent, and obviously we might not have properties on top of the cliffs, but we do have lots of people who are on the beaches underneath the cliffs. So I'm just wondering if there's anything preventative that we would want to do with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And if I can ask, add a subsidiary to that before I bring Councillor Ernest in. So if members of the public notice cliff falls, is there a means by which they can report that? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. It's really that if members of the public want to report this for the team in the back office to investigate, it's just really making a call and reporting it through C1V. And the team will pick that up and evaluate it accordingly. And if it is council land or we can overlap with a landowner, then we would undertake maybe some signage or audit report if that was necessary or not. But then we've got to be careful on liabilities and putting signs up and who is responsible. So it's just simply reporting it to C1V and we'll pick it up and make an assessment accordingly.
And coming to Councillor Prothero's point, concerns about people sitting under, right? Because I've certainly, walked across the coastline and noticed people sitting right under bits of the cliff, and I thought that's probably not a good idea in terms of water running down the front of the cliff face. So in terms of any areas where there's a perception there might be a risk of rockfall and members of the public are unaware, particularly if they're visitors. So how would an issue like that be addressed or raised?
We do have that commonly, and in some of the areas Councillor William mentioned earlier, particularly Jackson's Bay, it's a big problem. It's a problem at Barry Island. We have installed signage at those locations, and often people sit under that signage where rockfall's having picnics, and it is quite concerning. I guess for the rural areas where we're not the landowner, it's very difficult for us to pick up. And if we don't own the land, we don't have liabilities, and we don't put that signage up, I guess there is an element of people having to evaluate their own risks in those areas. But where we are responsible for land, we do try to install signage to create that awareness. We've done it at Lantwick Major Beach, I think commonly. It may be on the bathing and beach advice signs down in Ogmore and Southern Down, but we maybe have to check that to make sure it's included as some sort of risk. So at least people, when they visit the beach, they go to the prime location or the car parks, then if that's included on some of the signage, then that may be a way of we can enhance that awareness.
So presumably it's something local councillors could raise with you individually,
yes,
if they
of course,
felt there was a risk area that they wanted to raise. Yes, thank you. Councillor Ernest, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Well, thank you, Clive, for the presentation. You probably know that my ward area includes the Penarth seafront, and my area of interest, if you like, obviously extends towards Lavenock as well as towards Penarth Head and the barrage. We've had some very large cliff falls in the last 3 to 4 years, and your excellent photographs and surveys show those in considerable detail. And I'm just wondering what sort of reassurance you can give to residents living above those areas where the falls are. Frequently, the height of the cliffs are anything between 100 and 180 feet, or whatever that is in meters. So I'm looking at reassurance to residents, because there is no mitigation at all along these areas other than the rock facings down adjacent to Penarth Pier, north of Penarth Pier. And I'm wondering as well whether you would need to look at giving explanations of the actions such as moving the fence lines on the cliff tops back. For example, on the cliff walk at Penarth, the fence line was moved back several meters, probably 4, 5, 6 years ago. Penarth Head, the fence line has been moved back considerably in the last few months. And of course, on top of that, we've got the Wales Coastal Path, which runs from Lavenock through to Penarth, which is used by many tens of thousands of people every year. So all I'm really looking for, I think, Clive, if you can, is what sort of reassurance you can give residents, whether they could be a written reassurance or publicised in some way, so that those are living where there is the likelihood of further substantial cliff falls can receive a degree of reassurance. I mean, in my long life in the area, I've seen complete sways of trees go over the cliff edge into the sea. We talk about the Dardanelles, we talk about other areas in Penarth, and people looking at older photographs 30, 40 years ago will see that all the trees that were there are now gone. It's completely barren. Thank you for that, Chairman. Perhaps Clive could come back to me.
Thank you. Clive, are you able to pick those issues up? Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Ernest. I think firstly, in terms of reassurance to residents, we have discussions with individual residents, usually when some of their garden falls off the cliff or something's going to disappear. So we have our direct contact with certain residents. Some of the residents we don't have direct sort of contact with. What I would say is, unfortunately, the undefended sections of cliff are only going to go one way. They're going to carry on eroding. Yeah. The shoreline management policy for the sort of the Penarth frontage is to hold the line where there's existing defences. Yes. But the open, undefended sections of cliff, there's no intention to start armouring those up or defending those. The Natural Resources Wales website shows the coastal erosion risk management sort of mapping and predictions. The average rate of erosion on the coastline isn't forecast to impact any properties directly. Now, it may impact their gardens and they may lose sort of land, but it isn't forecast to get close to properties. However, I would say that that's an average rate, so it varies slightly around the coastline, but in the order of probably 150 mil, 6 inches per year. But we all know that it doesn't go that regularly. It tends to go in a bang, and then you'll lose sort of 5 meters, maybe a little bit more in one hit. Where that happens, there still shouldn't be any properties anywhere around the coastline in the Penarth frontage that would be sort of directly impacted, but it would be down to individual sort of property owners to be aware of the risk. I only think that there are the benefits of living on top of a cliff with amazing views, but I think most people will realise that also the cliff is eroding backwards. I think the best thing is if individual residents want some assurances or want to discuss the level of erosion risk, I would say point them in our direction in terms of the council, and they can talk to us as a sort of a coast protection authority, and we can sort of advise, do we think that the average rates are about right, but we can't provide any assurances, because you can bet if we said, oh, we think it's going to fail over there, it would probably fail in a different location. What we can say is it will continue to erode. There's no intention to put defences at the toe. Even if you did armour up the toe of the cliff, it would continue to weather back. So just through sort of weathering processes, not direct wave action, it would still sort of start to come back to a sort of a slacker angle and potentially in the long term impact on properties. So if you go beyond the shoreline management plans, look at a 100-year period. If you go beyond that, then at some point houses will likely be impacted by erosion, but we're talking quite a long time into the future, over 100 years out, based on the best evidence currently available. The reason we do the monitoring, as I said previously, is to check that those predictions are right, and if necessary, make improvements as we go forward. What I've also made a note is that there were comments about the fences. A member of my team, we do liaise with sort of parks and public rights of way over movements to the fence line and the impact on the coast path. But in terms of flood and coastal erosion risk management funding, funding wouldn't be made available just to protect or armour up the coastline to protect the coast path. The intention would be that the coast path moves back with the coast. Flood and coastal erosion risk management monies are targeted to protect sort of property rather than the coast path.
Thank you very much, Clive.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very grateful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. And I see no other hands from committee members raised, so I'm going to give the last word to Cabinet Member Councillor Gwyn John, please. Thank you, Councillor John.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I don't want to ask a question, actually, it's just a comment. At Llanford Major Beach, a few years ago now, a lady lost her life sitting under the cliffs. And with a stone fall, she was killed. But we have taken every precaution, putting signs up down there, but still people sit under the cliffs. And we've had further rockfalls at different times, and it's a dangerous place. So people don't help themselves when this happens. And quite honestly, we're always telling people, do not sit under the cliffs, although the signs are very large signs, and all credit to Colin and his team for doing everything possible. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, very important point to be making. So, Clive, thank you so much for coming to committee tonight and presenting that report. I think you can see from the level of discussion and debate that we've had, how interested members are and also how concerned members are about the issues that you've discussed with us tonight. This forms part of the committee's forward work programme, so we look forward to receiving a report again. I think it will be in about a year that we usually get a report. Yeah, and meanwhile, in terms of the recommendations, I move that we note the report, and Councillor Hooper, you're happy to second that. Thank you. I'm going to move us on now. Thank you very much, Clive. You're very welcome to stay for the final agenda item, but equally do feel free to go and enjoy your evening. Colin, are you remaining with us for this final item? Yes, you've got the full hit this evening, Colin. So thank you very much. And we move on to final agenda item for the evening, which is agenda item 6. As previously requested by committee, this report provides a 6-monthly update on local bus services in the Vale of Glamorgan. And again, this report is before us this evening for our consideration and to note. And to take us through this, we welcome back Kyle Phillips, Operational Manager for Transport. And Kyle, I believe, again, you've got a presentation for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So the purpose of this report was to provide an update on bus services following the April 2024 report. And there were a number of key items that also needed to be addressed within this report. Accessibility of bus timetables, regional partnership working, connections between homes, hospitals and bus interchanges, the local development plan and future bus routes, and the reintroduction of the Greenlinks G1 service. Next slide, please. So since the last report, I did mention the routes that we were tendering, and we'd got to the point where we knew who was going to be doing those routes, and they were just about to undertake them. And since then, we've awarded the legal contracts for the services listed on the slide. Funding sources, again, were mentioned in the previous report, but just to highlight again, we're using £470,000 from our council budget, just over £380,000 from our bus services support grant that we get annually from Welsh Government, and an additional 2.1 million that is now coming from Welsh Government as part of the bus network grant, which is the new money that's been made available to keep the bus network running following the COVID pandemic and the reduction in passenger numbers. Next slide, please. So just moving on to the next part of the report then, which is the update on what's happened since April. So if we run through these in operator order, Adventure Travel, we've seen increased provision on the Service B3, which we managed to obtain some additional bus network grant funding for. Cardiff Bus, there's been a host of changes listed in the report. I think the key one to mention is Service 7, which when I was here last time, I did mention that that was tendered by Cardiff Council, not ourselves, and unfortunately the link between Penarth and Landlock Hospital was left off in its entirety. It's pleasing to say that is now back. So as I say, I know that was an issue that was raised previously. That has been sorted. Service 95 running to and from Barry Island. Again, another welcome addition. And then there's a host of other changes then regarding reliability and timetabling, just some minor tweaks on Cardiff bus services there. First Cymru, we had again a number of changes on their services, which were mostly to do with reliability. If I take an example, the Service 320 was around 35% compliant, which means only 35% of the services were either running between 1 minute early and 5 minutes late. And since these timetable changes have come in, we're looking at about 80% now. So it's made a vast improvement. And in addition to that, the report will tell you we've had discussions with First Cymru about the 304, 320 and X2 running into the new bus station in Cardiff. Following discussions last week, that is now going to be put in place starting in the new year. So that's hot off the press, shall we say. Next slide, please. I was asked to look at promotion of bus services. We did have the free travel fare scheme on the 303 bus service that ran through the summer. During the peak month of August, we saw about 800 additional passenger journeys on the route, which was very positive. usually you tend to see with those types of schemes that once it's not free anymore, the numbers drop back to where they were. But it's pleasing to see that between, so in August we went up by about 800, and when we've gone back into September, the numbers are about 100 up on the month in June. So we have seen, hopefully, additional passengers running on those routes following the free travel scheme. We've done some promotion of My Travel Pass using our social media channels and leaflets, which again gives 16 to 21-year-olds a third off their bus travel. So trying to encourage the youngsters to use the buses. We have had printed timetable leaflets distributed to libraries and council offices for Cardiff bus services. We're currently working with Adventure Travel and First Cymru to get some additional timetables from them. And we're continuing to work with our e-display supplier Journeo and Transport for Wales on getting real-time information up and running on our e-displays. It's currently being rolled out across the Cardiff Council estate. And we've been told that we'll hopefully be one of the next ones to go live with real-time information. Next slide, please. So accessibility of bus timetables, and this came about from a number of queries raised about where they were positioned within shelters, font sizes, etc. So the bus operators generally use the Department for Transport inclusive transport strategy, ensuring they're accessible, legible, clear fonts, high contrast colour schemes, and to ensure consistency, they tend to follow a standard format by operator, which I'm sure people will have seen when they've looked at the timetables. We do have some issues where we may have a number of bus services serving a particular stop, and you may have two operators running at that stop. So we have tried to work with the operators to make sure that they take up their portion of the space in the timetable case. And speaking to all three of the operators who work within the Vale, they have all said if there are any issues, you can report them to us and we'll obviously take them up with them and they will deal with them. Next slide, please. As far as the working with the Cardiff Capital City region and partnership working across the local authorities, obviously the Cardiff Capital City deal is a mechanism aimed at transforming the economy, business landscape and potential for inclusive prosperity across South East Wales. They did fund part fund the Barrytock interchange, and we've got other schemes such as Cogan interchange on the aspirational list. Following on from that, we've got the creation of the corporate joint committees, which now sees a much more joined up approach between the local authorities within the Cardiff Capital region. And we're working on the regional transport plan and transport scheme prioritisation matrix, which aims to put active travel and public transport network at the forefront. We do continue to work with our officers or colleagues in Cardiff, Bridgend, Rhondda and Taff, where a lot of our bus services cross boundaries to ensure that they run how we want them to within both authorities. The prime example is the meeting last week with First Cymru, where it was ourselves, Cardiff and Bridgend that were involved in those discussions on making sure those buses run into Cardiff and use the new bus station there. Next slide, please. So looking at connecting homes and hospitals and bus interchanges, and I know this was born of queries regarding Culverhouse Cross and Sycamore Cross, and potentially running buses into Tesco's and Marks and Spencer's and having an unofficial kind of bus interchange there. It could be a future aspiration, but at the moment we're just trying to keep the bus network as it is, which is using the bus network grant to do so, which was the principle of why it was born. So we wouldn't be looking to make those kind of tweaks at the moment. And in addition, it's the additional time it will take on the timetable. And as I mentioned, reliability is an issue at the moment. So we would probably look at that as a future aspiration again. Most of the Vale bus services run in and out of Cardiff city centre, and you can get onward connections to University Hospital of Wales, as well as Landock. One positive again from the meeting I had last week, due to the Crossrail plan for Cardiff, where they're going to be running from Central Station through to the Bay, we are now aware that that's going to cause or have a massive impact on bus services and probably all transport running towards Callahan Square. So the X2 service that operates along the A48, we haven't agreed this yet, but there's potential for that to run through Ely and into the bus station. The bonus of running through Ely is that you can get an easier connection to get to the Heath Hospital, which at the moment, if you get into the city centre, you do have to walk to the next connection. So that would be an added bonus, depending on what the timetable changes with the X2 in the future. Next slide, please. So the revised local development plan preferred strategy was considered by full council on the 11th of July. We do feed into that with colleagues in planning, but generally with bus services, while operators will be aware of them, they obviously their intention is to get passengers within the services, so they would wait until housing development sites are built and residents are living there. And we do often work with the operators on that, and I've given some examples there. The Service 88, once the new developments were built on Hayes Road, started running down Hayes Road again. The 95 running down Ford and Millennium, again another new section added to the route, and Service 905, which was running via Roos Point in one direction en route to the rail interchange. So once these developments are put in, operators are very keen to run into them to make sure they can get more passengers on the buses. The future franchising model, while it'll make controlling of the bus network slightly easier, unfortunately, it is some time away. We're looking at 2029, 2030 probably for that to come in. I say the one issue we do have with that is the funding available for franchising. There's no, at the moment, there's no plan to increase funding, and obviously if we're looking at 4 or 5 years' time in real terms, that's not going to be the same amount of funding, it's probably going to be less. So as that unfolds, hopefully we'll get a clear indication of where we're going. Next slide, please. So the reintroduction of green links, I'm going to cover in a separate report that I'm going to bring to committee next month, which will give a whole picture of green links and how the service is running. We're looking at the G1 service at the moment and the reintroduction. Something we've decided to do before we do that is actually a membership survey to see what our members want. We've got just over 2,000 members, so we want to get their feedback. And that'll then give us a clear indication of how we can take that G1 service forward. And I think that is next slide. This is just a quick brief overview, just to say that we've only got 4, well, you could probably call it 3 commercial services remaining in the Vale. So ultimately, we're nearly a franchised bus network in the Vale of Glamorgan, albeit, as I said, with the bus network grant, it's not to introduce any changes to the network as it stands, it's to keep it as it is. Funding is a major issue. We need to keep the funding as it is to keep the network as it is, and that funding will then be transferred across to the franchise bus network in years to come. Annual funding, again, at the moment with bus network grant, we don't know. We haven't been told what we're getting next year. We're safely assuming it's going to be the same because the plan is to keep the network as it is. But again, without the funding, we do get limited growth in commercial services, and there's not going to be too much change over the next few years, I wouldn't imagine. And next slide, and that's the end of the report. Any questions? Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kyle, for taking us through that. I'm sure that there will be lots of questions from committee. Councillor Hooper, thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Kyle, and thanks for your report. I've got a few questions. I'll try and be brief.
Can you?
I will be brief.
Let's do 2 at a time. Thank you.
Okay. Cardiff City region, we talked about first in the city deal and integration. I think the focus of why we were asking that question in the first place was about strategic interventions. So the strategic intervention was the bus interchange at the docks offices. So I really welcome what's changed, how many services are actually using that intervention at the moment, and to see whether there are any more. It feels like there's a lot of talk going on, but what's happening with Cogan Interchange, so I'd like a bit more detail on that if possible. And the second thing, and it is linked, we've not talked about school bus service this year, I understand that, but there are lots of places in the Vale and in Barry that don't have a school bus service at the moment. So how can the standard services pick up some of that slack? Can it? So I know it's very difficult for some people to be able to get from Barry Island to Whitmore High, for example. And there was a time when they were going one way, but not the other way. So what can the commercial services do to pick up that slack? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Kyle, are you able to come back in?
Yeah,
Thank
no problem.
you.
So there's two services running to Barry Dock at the moment. As I said, with the way the bus network grant stands, we're not looking to change too much, because the idea is by the time franchising comes around, we've got the same network, and then we can look to make the tweaks. Cogan Interchange, yeah, that's kind of on the aspirational list again. We're working with the Cardiff Capital Region on a route or transport scheme prioritisation tool, because obviously it's got to cover every local authority within there. It's going to be a very, very long list. But we've got a meeting with them next week to go through that with them. So at the moment, there's no more news on Cogan Interchange that I can give you to update you. With regard to school bus services, that was a commercial service run by an operator, because those pupils, obviously my other hat is school transport, but they don't qualify for free school transport. Therefore, we don't have a statutory duty to provide that form of school transport. We did speak to operators to see if anyone could do anything. We haven't had much feedback, unfortunately. But I am aware there may be another plan through the school.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. You want to come back in?
Yeah, can I just come back on that point and just encourage, maybe this committee needs to put some pressure on the council in that regard to help you, Kyle, to push operators, because I think it's really important, especially as we're getting into darker nights. And I've had one resident who's contacted me concerned about their daughter's welfare, being able to walk between the schools and Barry Island. So I think it's something I'd urge you to go back to and see whether we can get any movement in that, and maybe the committee is minded to do something about it. My last point, I'll summarise the next question is all in one. You talked about funding, and I think we heard you clearly, but it feels very much as though the Welsh Government isn't taking buses seriously as a point. You're saying that you need significantly more funds to be able to run this properly, and I'm just wondering how we can help that process. It might not be a question for you, it might be a question for the Cabinet member to respond to, but this feels like something that buses are always the Cinderella service. The Cardiff City deal is funding the Cardiff City Metro, whereas we've already got roads to be able to run buses, and because people who use buses tend to be poorer than people who use rail transport as a general rule, they often get forgotten about. Thank you.
Before I bring in other councillors, can I pick up that point about whether or not there's anything that this scrutiny committee can helpfully do in terms of supporting all the efforts that are clearly already happening in terms of talking with bus operators about the needs of residents in the Vale. I'm not sure that's something necessarily for a scrutiny committee, because obviously our role is to be here to scrutinise the information before us, but is that something that you're able to help us with, Kyle? Is there a role for us in that, or is that something that we would be better referring to Cabinet member?
As far as residents are concerned, we do a survey every year, and we get feedback about bus services and what people would like to see, and then we sit down with the bus operators and see what's possible. The problem we've got at the moment is any little change will involve funding. You know, and it used to be, going back pre-COVID, that if we looked at altering a route slightly, it would be done. But now anything, it needs money, and we haven't got the money to throw at it. So I would suggest anything we can do or that can be done to help. Yes, if the committee can be involved, but it's probably to come through cabinet, I would imagine.
That might be something for us to pick up outside of scrutiny, unless you want to suggest a recommendation. But I'll come back to you, Councillor Hooper. Let's continue, if I may, with the questions, and let's pick that up at the end before we finish discussing this item. Councillor Ernest, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Kyle, I've had concerns expressed to me over access to Barry Hospital from Penarth. Quite a number of people from this area have to go to Barry Hospital, either because it's, I believe, a minor accident unit, but also they've had to go down there for such things as eyesight tests and various other regular medical procedures. And they tell me, and I believe them, that it's very, very difficult and inconvenient to get from Penarth to Barry Hospital because there's no service that passes the door, and it involves changing and waiting and so on and so forth. Can you tell me what improvements you intend making to provide better access to Barry Hospital from Penarth? Thank you.
So I think that cuts to one of the issues that you addressed in your presentation in terms of improving that connectivity between communities and health facilities, Kyle, but specifically Councillor Ernest's point. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said in the report, we haven't got any specific plans or changes we'd be making at the moment. But again, that would form part of the franchise of bus services when Welsh Government Transport for Wales would have full control of them. At the moment, we're in that sticky situation where we've taken on funding commercial services, but with the basis that they will still be around when franchising kicks in. So, without knowing where the people live, you know, which services they're going to catch, is quite difficult to say what they could use to get there. I can do some digging in the background and come back to you on that, though, just so you've got information on connections that they can use to get from Penarth to Barry Hospital.
Well, yes, I think that's it. I mean, the alternative to that, Chairman, of course, is that we ask the Health Board not to direct people living in the Eastern Vale to Barry Hospital if they can't get there. It's as simple as that. But thank you very much, all the same.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Iannucci-Williams, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. I was just wondering, are we collecting numbers on how many people are actually using these services, so that we've got a better sense of their viability in the future? Just wondering, because I know obviously we had the free bus service in the Western Vale over the summer, but did we collect numbers on how successful that was or anything like that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. If I can add just a subsidiary to that, if I may, Carol. So how is that determined? Is that something that we would be monitoring? Is that something that the bus operators are monitoring? Thank you.
It's a very good question. As part of the agreement with the bus network grant, operators have to provide that information to Welsh Government. It's confidential at the moment, but the idea behind that is you will hopefully find a point where you can decide whether a service would be commercial or not again, because we're funding services that were previously commercial. So that data is being collected, and we work with our regional partners in South East Wales to look at cost per head, whether it's going up, whether it's going down. But as I say, at the moment, because that is an agreement between the operator and Welsh Government, we aren't party to having all that data. We do collect data, like I said earlier, for the free bus service because we've funded that through Section 106. But with the other element, we're not party to that information, so we can't share it with anyone at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor, I don't know if you wanted to come back in on that. But clearly that's a really important issue, isn't it, Councillor?
Yes, please. So, so just be clear then, not information that we would be able to share, but would it not? Is that not something that we should be trying to get access to as a council, so that we can make decisions sort of slightly further into the future at all?
Because the large proportion of the money comes from Welsh Government, that element we wouldn't be able to look at. And again, that's because that's an agreement between them and the operator. We do get some information for the services that we've supported previously, and we do look at that and work out whether they are. The problem with those, so if we take it as an example, the 321 service, which runs through rural Vale, you may find that your cost per head is a lot more than a service that runs through Penarth. But it's the only service that runs in the rural Vale. So it is something we do consider, and we have got some figures on patronage. But again, what will happen in the long run is all this will form part of the purpose of franchising and how franchising will work, and what the future of bus services will be.
Thank you, Carl. I mean, it does feel to me as if I understand that this sits outside our control, because this is a conversation between Welsh Government and the bus operator, but we are putting almost £500,000 into subsidising the non-commercial routes. And therefore, I find it really surprising that that information isn't shared with us as a significant contributor, because clearly we have an interest in understanding which are the routes which have the potential to be more commercially viable. Because if we can see that there are some routes that were previously commercially viable and may become commercially viable again, then surely that would be an area where we would want to be particularly focusing our efforts in terms of promoting services. I mean, that does feel to me, coming back to your original point, Councillor Hooper, that might certainly be an area where we can make a recommendation as the Scrutiny Committee about Cabinet members and all those involved in those conversations with Welsh Government making that point, that we feel that data should be shared with us, so that we, as a financial contributor, are party to that and able to focus our efforts accordingly. Yeah, that's
agreed.
a comment. You don't. I was going to say you don't have to. You don't have to respond to that. But thank you. Councillor Prothero, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to totally agree with what you've just said and support Councillor Williams's comments, because as a county, it's probably incumbent on us to try and get more of our residents onto the buses. This is about our sustainable future. This is about getting people out of cars. So to be able to, one, have a benchmark to start from, so we know how many people are getting on the buses, and then to actively do something with the operators to increase it, and then be able to see how we're doing. I would think Welsh Government would want that as much as we do. So I support everything that's been said as a recommendation for going forward. Comments I just want to make for us in the Rural Vale and the 303. It was great to see how many people were using the bus during the summer when we had the free 6 weeks of travel. I used it myself on a few occasions, and it was wonderful. We had a community sing-along on one journey. It was brilliant. So I'd love to do more of that, although we don't have any more Section 106 money, but that would be fantastic. I think as well, for the rural areas, and this is where I am sure we're not the only part of the Cardiff capital region that has rural areas that has no access to a train service. So it is the only option of public transport. And I think that, seeing as we've spent so much money in the Cardiff capital region on the metro and on trains, there also should be money spent on a strategy for our rural locations and the kind of service, and I'm really happy that the G1 is coming back online, that on-demand service. We need to have a project looking at how effectively that could be used. in areas across the Cardiff Capital Region, and I don't really see why that couldn't be a little piece of work for them to undertake as well. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. The CJC does have a working group which is just now being pulled together, which is meeting, because I think, as Councillor Prothero has indicated, there are a number of local authorities that share the concerns and the pressures that we have as a local authority. I don't know whether there's anything you want to respond to that Councillor Prothero has raised, Kyle.
I was just going to say that ideally what we would like to see is a bus network that feeds into the train stations that allows you through ticketing, which allows you to buy a ticket on a bus, then they let you jump on the train, and therefore we could make better use of the bus resources in places like the Rural Vale, because we could have shorter routes that run people to train stations. And again, I feel like I'm saying franchising a lot, but part of the franchising scheme is to have that through ticketing element, which will give you better access to public transport. So again, you know, I can't say it's going to happen today, but in the future, that would be the aim. And that is kind of how I would like to see those bus networks modelled.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. Councillor Norman, you did have your hand up. I just want to check whether or not you wanted to come in with a specific question.
No, my question has been answered. Thank you.
Thank you for confirming, Councillor. Councillor Hooper, you wanted to come back in.
I just want to pick up on what Councillor Prothero said about bus services for rural communities, and that's the only choice. It's also the only choice for some of our urban communities, even though there are train services relatively close. Without a car, it's still extremely difficult to get from the northern side of Barry down to any of the train stations. And some of our communities where car ownership is really low are some of those communities as well. So I think bus services really do need to be prioritised. I think this committee should be quite robust in pushing to support. I think it should be supporting the council's push for it to be less than a Cinderella service. I think it's really important. And you're too young to remember this, but I'm not. I remember the Barry Bustler service. And we've had things that have worked before in the past, and you think that you could do this. There's people smiling fondly at the Bustlers. You know, I think we've had solutions, and we just need to reconsider them. And I'm just, if I may, Chair, I think you mentioned the point, Kyle, about wanting young people to utilise buses, and school services become that point where they trust the service. And I think that talks to why we need to make sure that these school services actually work as well, because people need to feel confident that when they rock up, it's going to be there. It'll take them where it wants to go at the time it is as well. So I think it's hugely important. There's no question in that at all. But
So it's a important point, well made. Thank you. Councillor William, did you want to come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say I was very interested to hear about the concept of through ticketing. I think that's essential. I think it's really exciting. We've seen it working in Gwynedd, where the trains and the bus timetables actually match each other. So, you know, if we could try something like that or achieve something like that in the Vale, it would be a major game changer for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any other hands from committee members, so I'm going to bring in a Cabinet member who wants to contribute to our discussion. Councillor Wilson, please.
Yeah, thanks. Obviously, this is not my area directly, but nevertheless, engineering in terms of the roads is very much my area. And obviously, buses do have an impact. And obviously, I think if we can have a much easier transition of buses integrating with trains or buses integrating with nearby buses, that certainly will reduce the possibility of road traffic accidents involving pedestrians. I also think it will also improve the infrastructure generally, and I welcome any initiative that does that. And obviously, I will feed back some of the comments made to Councillor Bowen-Brooks, who is the relevant Cabinet member for buses.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much, Kyle. So I'm just going to try to sum up the discussion, because I do think that there's a recommendation that I'd like to suggest is taken back to Cabinet. I'm not going to get the wording perfectly here, and I'm sure members will tell me if I've missed anything. So I think what we've captured is that this Scrutiny Committee supports and indeed commends the work that's being done by officers to address the continuing challenges around the provision of local buses that meet residents' needs. And we are concerned about the inability so far to secure adequate provision to support school services. We're also concerned to learn that the discussions that are happening around passenger numbers are not being shared with the council. And given that the council is a significant funder of bus services, that is a matter of concern, because it's important that we understand if routes have the potential to become commercially viable again, so that efforts can be focused in those areas, particularly to promote use of the buses. So I would suggest that that's a recommendation that goes back to Cabinet, and that what we would be looking for is for Cabinet to use the conversations that it is having at various levels in Welsh Government around those, particularly the issue around data being shared with us. Councillor Hooper, you're giving me a thumbs up. Good. Hopefully I've captured the particular concerns that have been raised today. But Kyle, thank you very much for the report. And can I just say thank you in particular, because in your presentation, I think you addressed all the issues that were previously raised by the committee, and it's really encouraging to see that. It's really helpful to see that. It is encouraging, despite the challenges, to see that progress has been made in some areas, that we are seeing improvements to routes and that some of those gaps are being addressed. So thank you for the work that's being done, and please do convey our thanks back to your colleagues, so I know we're continuing to work really hard in this area. Thank you, committee. Sorry, yes, apologies. So two other recommendations. One is that we note the report. I move that, and thank you, Councillor Hooper. And second recommendation is one that you've already addressed, Kyle, which is that a report on the reintroduction of the Green Links service, particularly G1, is brought before committee in December. Thank you very much for that. That brings us to the end of tonight's business. So all I'm left to do is remind everyone that our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, the 10th of December at 6 o'clock. Thank you, committee, for all your contributions this evening, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Good night.